Then everybody get ready for our next presenter. He is a Microsoft Access MVP, host of the Access Europe user group, active in many Access forums, and he runs his own website with a plethora of useful information and demos. His presentation today is about technical UI design with Access Forms. So take in all this applicable information to enrich and improve the user experience of your application. Please welcome Colin Riddington.
Thank you, Philippe. As Philip said, my name is Colin Riddington. I run Mendip Data Systems, and today I'm going to do a whistle-stop tour showing various ways that you can enhance your Access forms under the title, You Can Really Do All That with Forms? All of the items I'm going to cover and more that I won't have time for are covered in an article on my website, isleofdogs.co.uk, add features forms. I've got far too much to cover in one session. Therefore, I apologize in advance. I won't manage to do the code for all of the items that I'm actually going to show you today. But in most cases, the code is designed such you can just plug in the modules that I provide with each application. So this title was inspired by a very old article by the late and great Michael Kaplan. You can do that with data sheets. And until I'd read that, I hadn't realized the power of data sheets, and there was so much I actually wasn't using at the time. And on the same idea, I want to actually try and extend the functionality of other forms as well, particularly continuous forms. The four main areas I will cover today, highlighting different parts of the form, enhancements to datasheet forms that weren't available when Michael wrote his article. As I said already, continuous forms, trying to provide some of the power of data sheets in continuous forms and then get the advantages of their appearance, and other items, other odds and ends that don't fit into any particular category. And your challenge for anyone watching this is to see how many of Carl Donabauer's UI guidelines I break in my applications that I'm going to show you, probably quite a few. Okay, I'm going to start with highlighting then, and let me just say at the start that undoubtedly some of the items I'm going to show you will be familiar to people in the audience. I hope that all of you will find something new and useful to you as well. But let's start with just showing you how you can highlight the current control in a database. I'm going to show you two methods, neither of which requires any code whatsoever. And transparency here, and I have managed to change this slightly in my rush earlier on. I'm just going to change that back to transparent. As you saw then, I'd set up some controls here which were yellow when the background was normal or solid. When I click on each of these, the background changes to transparent, the yellow coloring comes back. And the reason for that is that whenever a control is made active, the background, if it is transparent, is automatically changed to normal, and therefore any coloring that you impose before you impose the transparent property will be shown there. So when highlighted, it comes up as yellow, and when you move away, it goes back to transparent again. Very simple, and it works well if you've got a light colored or white colored background, as I have here. But if you've got a dark background, that wouldn't work so well. Let me show you what happens if you make this one transparent. And as you can see here now, it looks like everything's read-only. It's not obvious that there's anything there that you should actually be doing. So let me change this one back to normal again. And as you can see here, they are white background normally, but when I click over these, each of these this time go green. And the way I'm doing that is using conditional formatting. And if I just go back to design view once more, all those highlighted, I've got the same conditional formatting on each of them, that when the object gets focused, or when the control gets focused, we get a green background and bold type. So both very simple, choose whichever of those you want, very easy to apply in each case. And that works well for a single form. Let's extend the idea to a continuous form. And I'm using the same transparency idea for this one because I've got a light colored background, and that works absolutely fine. But what if you want to highlight an entire column? Well, by clicking on the header, I can add that functionality. This does require code, and in fact, it's rather more complex than it might seem at first sight. Let me just show you how that works. Each of those controls, each of these labels has got the same name as the control that it's related to with underscore label at the end. Standard Microsoft convention, surname underscore label, forename underscore label, and so on. When I click on any of those, I run a function called highlight control from label with the name of the form after it. So I can apply this to any form I like. And the code for that is in mod highlight. Bring that across onto this screen here. Right. The code for highlighting the entire column is a bit more complicated than you might expect. And the reason for that is that a label in one section, in this case the header, has got absolutely no link to the related in the general sense of the word. Access has no link between the label and the control that it actually is acting as the header for. There's no connection between them whatsoever. And whereas with an active with a control, when you click on it, you can find the name of the control by using the active control.name code. That doesn't work for a label because a label cannot gain the focus. So in order to identify the name of the control by clicking on the label, we have to go through a rather convoluted route. We need one API, get cursor position. And then this is the code that we have. We click on the label, and from that we get the position of the cursor, the X and the Y position on the form there. And then we run some accessibility code called ACK hit test. Nothing to do with access, accessibility hit test, if you like. And that will tell us the name of the object underneath the mouse cursor at any time. Now, at this point, I'd just like to thank particularly Carl for answering a question in an email group that I actually asked this, and Mike Wolf for providing an article that acted as my foundation for getting this code and using it in multiple places in today's presentation. Anyway, coming back to here, we click on the label, we get the name of the object we get the object underneath, and from that we can find out either its name or its caption or its position. I'm using the name in this particular case, so I get an object, I get its name, and then I'm stripping out everything including and after the underscore to just get the rest of the text. So therefore, for surname underscore label, I get surname, and so on for forename, etc. I then clear any backstyles at the moment there, change it back to transparent. Control backstyle equals 0, and then as long as I have actually got an object under the cursor, then it sets the backstyle of that object, or rather the control that's derived from the object, to normal. And therefore, I'm using the same idea as before with the transparency. I can highlight the entire column. Notice that when I do this, I'm not actually changing the focus to there. I've still got the focus where it was before, but I can highlight the column and then do something with it. And you'll see I'm going to do things with this in later examples coming up. Let's leave that one. In a continuous form, you can obviously sort and filter columns. Unfortunately, Access doesn't provide you with any way of seeing what those sort and filters are. And I could do this with buttons, or I could do this with labels at the top here, but I'm actually showing here that this form is by default ordered by the last name, surname, and then the forename. I can, by doing that, I'm using a similar method to before. I'm highlighting those in yellow. I'm also summarizing the sort order up here. If I click on this, again, I've now reversed the sort order, and I've added, to indicate the fact that I'm actually on this column at the moment here, I've added an arrow to show it's actually sorted descending, okay, from Z to A. Click it again, back to A to Z. Similarly, any other column, I can sort those as well. If I want to, I can change and sort by another column, and in which case it sorts by that first and then by surname and forename. So I can sort by any columns that I wish to do so, and each one I do will be summarized up here and highlighted in yellow. I can also, if we just go back to here, I can also filter, and in a similar way I can now show what filters I've got, both in a summary here and by the fact that the filtered column is highlighted in a different color, green. Let's also filter by a tutor group. This is some invented students from a imaginary school. I'll just show the females and you can get the idea of this. So I'm showing a summary of the filters and a summary of the sorts up here. I can also clear each of those and get back to the default. Let's go to design view. Sorry about the main form coming up here. And when I click on any of those, it runs a function called getOrderBy followed by the field name, as you can see on the right hand side there. When I click on any of these, it will allow me to show a multi-select menu. I'm not going to cover that now because that's coming up in a later example. But if we go back to this one then and look at the getOrderBy, this actually has most of the code used in this particular example. So it starts off by defining the SQL used for the form, the continuous form display. It then determines the name of the active control and uses that for the latest sorting information. From that, it builds a string which will allow it to summarize the information at the top. It's hidden now because I've actually got rid of that, but you saw that in yellow before. And then having got that string, then we use that string in order to do some coloring. I forgot to mention that we also then build the record source in its entirety with the order by and also the filter by here as well. But coming back to the main part this then, so we've got then the sort string order by, and then we go through that and look to see if there's any controls whose name is in that sort string, and if it is, we color those in yellow, provided they aren't also filtered, in which case that takes priority. So as long as they're not colored in green already, we will then color those in yellow if they are part of the sort string. I'll miss this bit out here, and just to say then, we use buttons. We could use labels, but the reason I'm using buttons is purely, just coming back to this here, so that we can highlight the button here and show the up and down arrow, and those appear in the image gallery as two small symbols there. With labels, we could do exactly the same functionality, but we wouldn't be able to show the up and down arrows so easily. It would be possible by changing the caption, but it wouldn't be so easy. Carrying on from there, we then also, having done this, we then go on to the second part, and I'm skimming through this code here to speed things up. We do something similar with the filter. Having filtered one or more columns, we then build up a filter string, which we use to display in the top part up here in green, and then we look to see any control names that are part of that, and then we color those controls in pale green. And we can clear those, as you saw, with these two buttons here. So I use this a lot in many of my different continuous forms. As I say, it's very easy to sort and filter them, but not so easy to actually show what you've done at any time, because you don't have the datasheet thing with the down arrow and little symbols indicating filter or sort. I'll say no to that. The only thing about that is you might not like the appearance of buttons up there, so you can make it look more like a continuous form with labels here. They are still buttons, as you can see, so I can get the same functionality, but they look more like a standard continuous form. Let's come out of that. The next one I suspect is familiar to a lot of you. Current record can also be highlighted using code in a continuous form. unlike a data sheet where it's actually done automatically, continuous forms don't have that appearing as a standard feature, but we can add it. And the way we add it is two things: that we have a text box normally hidden, which shows at any time the primary key field, in this case is class ID of a that you've actually selected, the current record there. So in the current record event, you set that text CF, text conditional formatting, equal to the class ID here. And then the second thing we do, I will show you this in code first, and then I'll show you the conditional formatting. So form current event, then we set this text CF equal to the class ID. And then if we go to the conditional formatting, design view, we can see behind here, let me just narrow the property sheet slightly. In design view, you can see that we've got a text box, which is called text color. And when we click on here and go, oh, sorry, wrong one, we click on conditional formatting, whenever the expression class ID is equal to that up there, which it is for the current record and the current record only, it highlights the background in green. And there's no text in it, but I've set the fore color to green as well in this particular case. So again, you can highlight the current record very easily, whichever color you want. And as I say, you'd normally hide that. Coming out of here. I said it was a whistle-stop tour. I hope I'm not going too fast, but I'm conscious of the time. It may seem a strange idea to suggest highlighting an entire form. After all, that means that everything stands out in exactly the same way. But what I'm actually doing here is I'm dimming the background. And on this startup form here explains the idea. There's one line of code needed and a module that provides all of the functionality. The dimming effect is done by a normally hidden form, which is when it's fully opaque is black. But I can change the transparency of that, or the opacity of that, between 0, no opacity, to 100, which is full blackout. Let's start with the default value of 80. And this will only work where you're using a form which is a pop-up form. So if I click on that, this form appears in the foreground here, and behind it the whole background, including anything that's open, the navigation pane, the access interface, and even the taskbar, has now been made dimmer. And also you'll see that clicking on this, it's actually the form background that's been maximized. I can't actually get focus on that. This will continuously stay in the foreground. Let's change that to 100. And now we've got a complete blackout. So that allows us to focus the user's attention on whatever form we feel is important enough to do this with. Now, to do this, we need very little code. There's obviously a lot of other code in my application tips form here, but the only thing that's actually relevant to this in the form load event is this one line here. We load a form called FRM dimmer, and we run a procedure called do dim, and we run it with the current form being the one that actually acts as the master, if you like, for that. Now, as I said, it has to be a pop-up form, otherwise it would be dimmed as part of the background. That dimmer form then, lots and lots of complex code. I didn't write it. Unfortunately, I don't know who did write it. I haven't got the name of the author. But if we scroll down here, setting opacity, dimming, form current, form load, blah, 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 blah. I've lost the do dim. I've gone past it. And what this does then is it determines whether you've got a parent form. And as long as you've got a parent form, then it brings it to the top. It makes sure that it is above the background form. You can also use this with a background picture. I never do, but it handles that in the same way. So basically, you've then got this code is loaded, and it stays loaded with that dimmer form being maximized, and anything behind it you've got no means of accessing. Now, for that reason, it's worth stressing that if you try to open that dimmer form on its own, you would have a problem because it does not have any controls to close it. It doesn't have any means of being accessed when it's open because it brings the parent form to the top. Therefore, if I try and open this, you will see action not allowed. This form is designed to be used in conjunction with other forms. It cannot be opened directly from the navigation pane. Now, this is very simple to do. In this case, it's particularly important. But if I go to the form load event for this, you can see, sorry, the form open event for this, you can see how I do it. And basically, the form open event checks to see whether the current object name is the name of this form. FRM dimmer, which it obviously is by opening it from the navigation pane. It then runs that message and then runs cancel equals true, which effectively means you close the form. So you've got a way of preventing certain forms being opened directly. Very useful here, but I use it in some other cases as well for different reasons. Okay, I've got more highlighting examples on my website, highlighting required fields. I've highlighted them in particularly hideous color of cyan there, highlighting search results, and you can look at those on my website in the article I showed, which I'll give you a link to later. Let's move on. Data sheets. I rarely use data sheets, although they're incredibly powerful. I don't like particularly the appearance of them, and I prefer to use continuous forms, but continuous forms have far less functionality built in. What a lot of people dislike about data sheets is the fact that you can't have any buttons and any things like search combos and so on a data sheet. And the normal way of actually making that functionality possible is to use a subform for the data sheet and have the main form having the buttons and so on there. I'm sure everyone's familiar with that. And I think that was mentioned in Michael Kaplan's article as well. But what wasn't available at the time he wrote the article was actually having split forms. And this picture here will allow me to open a standard access split form, but it's one where I have just made one slight change. See, it's a split form, single form in design view. And when I go back to form view, you can see then the single view has been hidden. And the way I've done that is I've moved the splitter bar right to the top, and then I've turned off the splitter bar. Can't get to design view. I've turned off the splitter bar in the property sheet there. Split form splitter bar, no. But with data sheets, then I've got the ability to do all sorts of things: sorting, filtering, moving, hiding, etc. And I'll show you them later on there. But a hidden benefit of datasheet forms is the fact that tables and queries in datasheet view in many ways act similar to a datasheet form. Similar to, not identical to. You can't run all the events that you can get from a datasheet form, but you can do certain actions, and you can use that for some degree of security. Now, I'm not suggesting that you can use this idea to stop your databases being hacked by a professional hacker, but you may have clients like I've had in the past who waste an awful lot of your time in support by messing around with the database, thinking they know how to use access databases. And normally when I release a database to customers, I will hide the navigation pane. I won't show any hidden items here. I'll hide the ribbon, and all of the functionality will be accessible via forms. I'm sure you all do the same thing. But certain people who know a little bit too much for their own good, just enough to be dangerous, may say, okay, I know how to make that visible again, and they mess around. And so whereas you may have forms where you have certain functionality in the load event, okay, and the form can be perfectly editable if you want it to be, but if they open your tables directly, they will not have any of the events from your forms actually imposed. And one thing you can do is you can make your tables read-only if opened directly. You can see I'm clicking on anything here, nothing is affected. That is true for all of these tables. None of them can be edited. Similarly with this one, single field, single record only, even my settings form, they can't edit it. So all of the tables have been made read-only. Similarly, so are the queries. But each of the forms can be edited. How does this work? I've shown all the hidden objects here so I can get to the auto exec macro. And if I click on zoom it so you can see that, first of all, the first thing it does is open a form called FRM hide, and it opens that hidden pretty obviously. And then it disables the shift bypass, locks the navigation pane, and opens the normal start form. Let me just show you the hidden form is nothing special. It just runs in the background. When that hidden form is opened, though, a timer event runs. I've got it running every half second. You can change that to suit your own particular needs. And it just says one thing. It sets any tables and queries read only. And the code for that here, I want to make the tables and queries read only, but I don't want any forms that have got the same name. I deliberately chose a form students as well as a table students here. I want the form to be editable. As you can see here, I just press Control Z. Okay, but I don't want the table to be. So coming back to this, we need a way of distinguishing between tables, queries, and forms. And what I'm using here is the fact that whereas tables and queries can have sub-data sheets, forms cannot. And therefore, if we use a property of a sub-data sheet like link child fields, because we can't have a sub-data sheet, we can't link any child fields. So therefore, if it's a form, that will trigger an error. If there's no error, we carry on with the code. So we look to see whether we've got an active data sheet form. If not, we then get the name of that active data sheet, set it as FRM, and then we do all the standard things we do in forms to prevent editing. We allow edits false, allow additions false, allow deletions false, and if you want to, allow filters false. Very simple. As soon as the form opens, within half a second, that code runs, and therefore it is read-only. So you might find that useful, as I say, not as a very high level security activity, but it's certainly a way of actually helping reduce meddlers. What I forgot to say there, I'll just open it again briefly. It's not fully locked down. I've locked the navigation pane, which disables some items here, but what that doesn't do is it fails to prevent you copying, and it fails to prevent you exporting. So there's still a lot that people could do with that. And I've addressed that in a similar example here. First thing, they can't right click. I've turned off the default shortcut menus. But this time, if we try and open any of these objects, you'll see, although it does open, it closes immediately. Same with the queries, but the forms open and stay open. So even if your user knows enough to make these navigation pane visible and tries clicking on these objects here, they will not be able to do anything with them directly. They also can't copy and they can't export because I've disabled the right click menu here. So the next thing they're going to want to do is to open the VB editor. Now I've deliberately made a way of doing that easily here by putting it in my quick access toolbar. Let's click on that. It's opened and it closed again immediately. In the same way as I actually open and close these, I can open and close the Visual Basic Editor, which makes it, of course, impossible for me to show you the code. Well, not quite, because all I need to do is to unlock that. And now I've unlocked that, I can get to the code. So it's the hide form again on the auto exec menu macro, then and the timer event. Then all it does is this time it runs three things: block table view query, and you can guess what this is doing, I'm sure. In fact, the first thing it does is it closes any VBE windows, does the same thing about checking whether we're talking about table, query, or a form, and if it's a table or query, the active data sheet then is immediately closed. And I've got the interval at half a second. I could shorten that if I wanted to, if I think that even that is too long, but it's sufficient for the purposes here. And we come back to here. The other two things it does, any open windows we've got here then are closed. At the moment I've got 2, it closes both of those, and it then immediately closes the VBE window as well. So data sheets made into, at least to some extent, a security measure. Let's move on. And what's about halfway through, just over halfway through, I think. Right, continuous forms. This is the main part in terms of things that I think will be new to you, but unfortunately it will take me too long to explain the functionality of each of these. The first one's on its own really, and you'll know that in a continuous form, what you've actually got is the same controls repeated for each record. So you've actually only got one set of controls here. And normally in a continuous form, either everything is visible or you can hide everything, but what you can't do is selectively show certain items. But you can see here that's the table on which this form is derived, but I can selectively hide the text box values there. I can select if it's B is hidden, and I can, if its color is black, that's hidden, but the others are visible. If the item is in stock, then that checkbox is visible, and also there is a button next to it so I can mark it out of stock. Let's do that. Oh, I can't do that at the moment because I've got the table open there. Come back to that in a second. And similarly, I've got combo boxes here with a corresponding image next to that, and I can change these. If it's anything other than, I still can't do it because this is open. So let's reopen that. And if I change that to be anything other than question, the image is visible. Change it back to question, it's hidden again. Let's now mark this out of stock, and the button disappears and the checkbox disappears as well. Now, the way this is done, it cannot be done with conditional formatting. Conditional formatting allows you to disable controls selectively, but it doesn't sadly allow you to hide those controls, at least not in the moment. You never know, Microsoft might add that as a new feature later this year if we're lucky. So at the moment, this is a workaround for that. Design view then. Now what we've got here is, as well as the controls that you could see, we've got some transparent buttons, or buttons that can be made transparent. Over that cat text box there is a button which is white in color. It's actually normal at the moment, not transparent in other words, and that is called Command Cat Cover. We've got another one over the color combo box, we've got another one over the checkbox, and we've also got another one over the images here. And in the detail event we've got, in the detail we've got one event, and that's detail paint. And the paint event allows you then to selectively make visible or hide controls here. So start off with this button, Command Update there. That is, let's go back to the normal view for this. That button is only visible if the item is in stock. If it's out of stock, then it becomes hidden. So it takes the value of the in stock checkbox, and if that is not true, then it becomes transparent. If it is true, it becomes visible. Similar item here for the other ones here. That this cat cover one here, the button there becomes transparent if this expression here is not equal to B. So if it is equal to B, the button is normal, white, and therefore you cannot see the item behind it. But if it is equal to anything else, then that button is transparent. And similarly for the other two here. This is a rather artificial example, and I'm not going to say for any sense this is a practical thing here, although I have done a second example with the Northwind database to show you more realistic use of this. But basically, transparency, which is only available as a property for command buttons, does allow you to selectively hide controls. But do bear in mind that if you've covered an object with a button, whether it's actually transparent or normal visibility, you can't click on the item underneath. And the other thing to say, you may have seen a slight flickering there. The combo box briefly came visible, so it's showing black there. When you actually have a button that's transparent, it is still in theory clickable. So what you need to do is to make sure that by your code you prevent it being clicked when it is actually transparent. And I've done that with the update button here, that it only works providing that checkbox is actually true. If it's false, then you can't do anything with it. I can't change that value directly. Okay, let's come out of this rather peculiar example. As I say, transparency, something I only discovered recently. The next 4 examples here are all ways of enhancing the functionality of continuous forms to make them as similar as possible in terms of their power to datasheet forms. Let's start with the datasheet form. Just to remind you then, you can click on a datasheet form and get a multi-select filter. You can also do other things with datasheets, like moving the columns and so on. And that I'm not going to be able to show you here because I've locked that there, but you can do various things. But the multi-select filter is something that is not available directly from a form in a continuous form. You can still get to it in a different way. I could select a column, I can then go up to here, and I can then click on the sort and filter, and I can from that get the multi-select filter. But it's a bit of a pain leaving your form after selecting a column and so on. And remember, the selected column's not actually marked. So one way that people often get around this is they have a series of checkboxes, and then you can just show the ones you've selected or the ones you haven't selected, or all of them. You can make them all visible or clear them all again. That is a way of doing it, but although it works, it's not the best way. I can get the same functionality here with clicking on the header. Not available natively. I can also do it by double clicking. I've left the single click so we can edit it by double clicking on the control itself. Now, to do this then, all right, I've had to, and it works for any of these columns, by the way, same multi-select filter. So it means that I'm not having to go up to the ribbon to do this. So how does this work? Now, this is the worst way of doing it. There's other better ways that I'll briefly show you later here. If we click on any of these, it runs an event procedure. If we double click on these, it runs an event procedure. Well, let's click on the event procedure for the label. And my machine just slowed down there. Right, so I've clicked on the surname label, and when I click on the surname label, it immediately sets the focus to the surname control in the detail section, and then it runs this command here, which actually is the multi-select filter menu. Similarly, if I just directly click on the surname, double click on it, it runs that same thing. So we can do this exactly the same code for every single control. It works. It's very, very tedious to do, and it's certainly not the most efficient way of doing it. There are better ways. I've got 4 better ways here. I haven't got time to show you all of them. They all work in similar ways though, and that is that I can reduce the amount of code or even remove the code completely from the form. Let me show you. The first one here uses class modules. The second one, class modules based on the name of the label above it. It's a button I'm using there. Second one bases it on the position of the label above the detail control, and the third and fourth ones are using the hit test code again. So I'm going to use that because I can do it more quickly here. So we right click on this, get that out of the way again, and we click on that. There is a function for each of these, show name multi-select filter form, exactly the same code for each of those. When we click on these, we've got another function here equals show multi-select menu. Let's have a look at the code in the form itself. That form is called former students cont name, and when we click on that, that is the entire code actually on the form. Nothing. All I've got there is some comments to guide anyone reading this to see what I've done. So what this does is, let's come back to the show multi-select bit. So you'll recognize this from before. Get cursor position, show name multi-select filter. As before, we click on the label, we get the object that's underneath the cursor from its position. We then get the name of that object, and we then remove everything after the underscore and the underscore itself. And from that, we've got the name of the control. We set the focus to the control, and then we run the filter menu to show the multi-select item there. And double clicking on the control itself just runs the same thing. So you've got a very simple way of getting all of the code without any repetition at all, just from a single item. Same idea with the continuous form caption one. This though uses the caption rather than the name here, but again we're using the hit test code, and having discovered this I use it a lot. So again, thanks to Carl and to Mike for their help in getting me started with that. It's now 22. I've got 10 minutes left, so I'm gonna have to speed up even more. Hide and restore columns. In a data sheet, this is what I meant to show you before, then we can hide columns like that. We can restore columns, unhide fields just by ticking again. We've also got some other ones hidden at the moment here. We can also do things like move those around from one place to another. And we can also change the width of those if we want to. All of that's built into data sheets. Unfortunately, none of that is built into continuous forms. So this is a similar data set to the previous example I showed, with some extra fields as well here. And what I've got here then is, again, I've got the ability to filter and shade in green and sort and shade in yellow, but that's not the main point of here. I can hide columns by just double clicking on the header. And as I hide them, they are added to this list box. If I decide I want to see them again, I just click on here and it restores them to the same place as before. Hiding them, everything, oh, got a slight glitch there. Hiding them, I'm just going to show all columns. Hiding them, you'll see that as I hide any column, all the columns to the right of it are shifted across to fill the gap. Now, what we're actually doing is, although it looks like we're hiding them, we're really shrinking those. Each of these has got exactly the same code, shrink selected column form. And when I click on this, and guess what? hit test comes in again, so I won't explain it all over again, but this time, having identified the name of the label and having identified the name of the control underneath here, we then get the original width of that. We need that for later on. We then reduce the width to the minimum possible, greater than 0, 1 twip, 1440 twips to 1 inch. So it's effectively invisible, but in reality, it's still there. And everything else to the right of it is then shifted across by the original width of the control we've hidden minus 1 twip. So we move that control to its current left position minus that we've just reduced the width of the other one by. So this will give us a way of getting controls hidden and restored very easily, and we can combine that with other features such as sorting and filtering coloring as well. Let's take this a stage further. Freeze columns. If you've got a very wide continuous form, then it would be useful to be able to freeze columns in the same way as you can for a data sheet. But by default, that doesn't happen. But I've got code here which allows me to make any of those columns, whatever number I like, 3 in this particular case, to be frozen. They don't show up very clearly probably on your screen at the moment. I can also lock those, and it now shows up a bit more clearly. Lock in the sense of they're read-only. I don't need to lock them in order to freeze them, though. I can still edit them and they're still frozen. You may have noticed the ActiveX scroll bar here moved over according to the number of columns, and you can see now those columns are staying in place. With this, unlike data sheets, I can only do this with the left hand controls. I can change the number of those. Let's have 8, and let's make them locked again so you can see it more clearly. And again, we can scroll and those ones stay in place. It also works though by tabbing. In there, and you can see it shifted across, and shift tab works in the same way as do arrow keys. And the code for this is available on my website and explained fully. Last one of these, move and resize columns. I've got 6 minutes left or so, I think, Philip.
Yes, exactly, 6 minutes.
Okay.
And we've got a couple of questions.
Okay, right, thanks. Right, move and resize columns. This is the other feature of data sheets that I'd love to see built into continuous forms. Let's do this in exactly the same way. I can select a column, and I've made it obvious that I've selected it by making the border here of the header and of each of the items in there cyan color. Now, having selected it, I can move it to the right or back to the left a bit. I can also change its width. And because I'm using a red button here, I'm actually using red coloring for that. So let's increase the width of that again. And let's do it with a different one here, year group. Let's move that to the left. And as it moves to the left, it's a green coloring. You see it disappears automatically after a short time. And I can reset all columns if I wish to very easily. Slight flash when you do that because I'm actually closing and reopening the forms. All right, let's move something across. We can also hide columns, so let's do that as well. Same functionality as before. If I close the form, I might want to keep that layout, or I might want to lose it. Let's say I want to save that for future use. Now when I come back in, I've got the same layout as before with 3 columns hidden and a couple of columns that have been moved. Oh, I've changed my mind. I want my original layout back. Oops, sorry, clicked the wrong button. I want my original layout back, so all I need to do is say no. And now all the columns are visible and we're back to the original layout again. So I can hide columns, move columns, resize columns. I can do just about everything you can do from a data sheet. I'll miss this one out, duplicate columns. I'll just go on to the last of the slides of examples here. I won't show you all of these. I'll show you 2 of these here. Move and resize borderless forms. A standard form, you drag by clicking on the title here, and if it's sizable, you can change it there. For a borderless form, you don't have a title bar and you don't have a border that you can click on. So therefore you can't do either of these natively, but you can, by using API code, you can move things around and you can also resize bigger, smaller the form as well. One last one, rounded corners. And rounded corners go in and out of fashion. At the moment, with Access 365, they're still out of fashion. With Windows 11, you're getting rounded corners coming back in again. In the old days, up to Access 2010, the top corners were rounded. Just see a slight bit of rounding there. I can use one single line of code in order to actually add rounding to just the top corners or to all corners. And I can change the amount of rounding if I want to change the effect. And at an absolute extreme, you can have a circular form, completely pointless really, but you can have a circular form where I've just taken this to extreme. That's my one line of code. UI round rect, current form, rounding amount of 500, and false means that all 4 corners are actually rounded rather than just the top one. I'll close that, and now as my final flourish, I'll just now move that out of the way. There's transparency here, and just say, if I go back on my PowerPoint, get it on focus so I can select it, and at the moment I can't for some reason. I just wanted to go to the last slide to remind you then, all of these examples, including the ones I didn't cover, but due to lack of time, are available at isledogs.co.uk, add features forms, and click on that very briefly. There is a link on each of those to a free example database with all the code, and in some cases to a video done at rather more leisurely speed explaining how they work. I'll stop there. Philip, sorry if I've overrun. Oh, I've underrun.
No, you didn't overrun, but you will be there in the feedback hour tonight, won't you?
Yes.
Yes, great. Then I will limit this to just one question, which I think is very closely related to your presentation and should be answered now. The ACC hit test function was mentioned a couple of times in the comments and questions. Is it available? What is it? What does it do? Can you say a couple of sentences about that?
It's built into Access, and it is available in, I believe, any version of Access, even going back to Access 2000 or whatever. And all you need to do is, I think, to actually see this is, I think you need to make it it's a hidden item in the VBE, if I remember correctly. I'll just double check on that. Am I still sharing? Am I still sharing? Yes. I am, right? Am I hidden?
You're not sharing anymore.
Oh, okay, right. I'll just double check here anyway. I won't go back on sharing. I'll do that later. Sorry, apologies. But it is available. There's no special code. It's not mine. And there are probably 20 or so accessibility functions. I've used 3. This one has one big limitation. You can't use it on a secondary monitor if that secondary monitor is to the left of your primary monitor. You can't use it with negative coordinates. It's a problem, a bug that I've actually reported to Microsoft, and they promised that they will look into it. So at the moment, ACHIS test only works on either a primary monitor or a secondary one to the right of the primary monitor. The coordinates must be positive.
Okay, great. Thank you. We've got a couple of more questions, but we will address them later in the feedback hour. So now is the time for a 9-minute break until the next session.
Okay, just to say, I'll put the link for that article in the chat, and also the PDF of my presentation will be available on my website on that site, as well as through Carl, within a day or so.